So Shimon Gibson doesn't really need introduction, but I will do it anyway. Professor Shimon Gibson, he is a lecturer at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte. Did I do that right? Yes. Correct. And we are talking about more than 300 articles and many books. The monograph on the undergrounds of the Temple Mount and the project, the joint project on Mount Zion together with Dr. Rafi Lewis, who is also here. But today we're gonna listen about interesting anecdotes, right, on research on the Temple Mount. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I know it's very late and we've had a lot of very good, stimulating lectures. I'm going to now go from late antiquity, the medieval period, all the way back to the Iron Age. I have to point out that there was supposed to be a different lecturer because I'm on the committee that organized this conference together with A.L. Davidson and of course Tzachi Devere and Yossi Garfinkel, and have I forgotten anybody else? Amitra M, of course, and one of our lecturers fell out. She wasn't able to attend, so I was asked if I was able to talk about something, and I'm here to talk to you about the Temple Mount during the Iron Age, which actually follows on from what we heard earlier on today. So let me make a very clear statement. We know almost nothing about the archaeology of the Temple Mount, Har HaBayit, in the Iron Age during this time span of the 10th to 6th centuries BCE. So what am I doing here? Well, I'm going to try and entertain you by saying that, yes, perhaps there is something. So while this is the case with the actual Temple Mount compound, the situation, as you all know, is rather different to the south of the Temple Mount in the area of the city of David, where, as we heard earlier, structural remains and stratified deposits from this period have indeed been found and are still being found. I should point out that the largely negative evidence for Iron Age remains from the Temple Mount area should not be taken to mean that there are no remains from the Iron Age there. As you all know, the hidden interior of the present Temple Mount is still largely unknown and unexplored territory. I should also add here, as part of this preamble, and that links into what we heard earlier, that the suggestion made by certain scholars, Oded Lifshitz and Professor Finkelstein as well, and others, that the ancient mound of the city of David was originally up on the summit of Mount Moriah at Temple Mount instead, seems unlikely to me. In sharp contrast to the paucity of Iron Age archaeological evidence, we do know quite a lot concerning the temple area based on, of course, the biblical perspective, particularly, for example, the data provided in the first book of Kings, chapters 6 to 7. But don't worry, I'm not going to go into any of that. And there's an enormous amount of research papers and books that have been published on this subject, usually without reference to archaeological data, simply because there is so little. However, what I intend to do in this short paper is to see if I can add just a little bit to our knowledge concerning the archaeology of the Temple Mount in the Iron Age, and I dedicate this to my friend, colleague, Professor Gabi Bar-Kai, whom I've known since mid-1970s, and has always been a mentor and a great friend and at all times. I still have a copy of your volume of Tushingham. So thank you very much, Gabi. You've always been an inspiration to me. Obviously, since one cannot dig on the Temple Mount, researchers should consider focusing on forgotten and hardly looked at materials in historical archives, such as the one at the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. Much of this data was painstakingly collated in the 19th and early 20th centuries by scholars and explorers, Wilson, Warren, among others. Their names have come up today quite frequently. And as you saw, so scholars have used archival materials a lot. However, many people are still surprised to learn that quite a lot of this material that you'd assume to be published and well-known still awaits proper and thorough reassessment. For example, in the early 1990s, together with my colleague, Dr. David Jacobson, who is one of the lecturers here today, I created a source book of information for the Temple Mount cisterns and underground chambers. Some of the maps and plans we included there had never been published before. There are also numerous letters and descriptions made by visitors to the Temple Mount deserving re-examination, and maps and drawings with surprising unknown details on them. Moreover, other archives have enormous caches of historic 19th century photographs of the Temple Mount area, which can provide an endless amount of information on the morphology of the area and on its architectural aspects. While such archival materials pertaining to the Temple Mount are not limitless, with some already having undergone scholarly scrutiny, there are still new discoveries from archives to be made, as I hope to demonstrate here this evening. So in this lecture, I'll be speaking about the following subjects: the topographical appearance of Mount Moriah and the discovery of Iron Age pottery in situ inside the Temple Mount area. 2, the identification of the morphology of a large subterranean cistern as possibly being of Iron Age type, leading me to a suggestion that its size and position may have had something to do with the location of Solomon's palace. If that's correct, that'll be quite amazing. I may be completely wrong. 3, the probability that the area of the temple in the Iron Age was originally surrounded by an enclosure wall. And I'll give you my thoughts on this as to the date of the earliest visible phase of the eastern Temple Mount wall, if we have time, because I know it's late and a lot of you want to step away to your homes, except of course those on Zoom in the States who are just in the middle of their day. Okay, so in terms of the first subject that I'd like to cover, the topography of Mount Moriah and Iron Age pottery finds. Our current knowledge concerning the overall topography of Mount Moriah is the result of the hard work of recording and mapping that was made by quite a few explorers and scholars, many with engineering and architectural skills, beginning in 1864 with Charles Wilson and in 1867 by Charles Warren, continuing in the mid-1870s with Claude Conder, and culminating with Conrad Schick, who was actively still studying the subject until his death in 1901. As I mentioned earlier, nothing has remained of the Iron Age Solomonic temple building, and anybody who's teaches archaeology of Jerusalem and of the Temple Mount knows that what we do is we tell our students about the temple at Ein Dara in northern Syria, to compare the layout of the shrine complex. And of course, now we have the very well-preserved remains at Moza. And I'm hoping to go and have a look at those, if possible, during my stay. I only arrived from the States at midday today. So it's generally accepted that the position of the Devir of Solomon's temple corresponds more or less to the Sahara rock situated beneath the dome of the rock. So here you can see the slide. This is Conrad Schick's Temple Mount model, but of course it can be dismantled. You can remove parts. This is in Christchurch, and then see the lower part, which is great because it gives you an idea of the underlying topography, all based on his observations. So if you have a chance of going there and seeing this model when it's being dismantled, and of course it'll be put together again afterwards, do so. So we can rely upon the remarkable record keeping of all available rock outcroppings and levels within the esplanade of the Temple Mount that have been observed by and noted by scholars and explorers in the 19th century. And here you can just see a few examples of these here and there. In any case, these show that the highest place, and thus the most convenient place to establish a temple, would have been in the immediate vicinity of the Dome of the Rock building of today. Hence, attempts to shift the possible location of the temple to the north and south of the traditional location is unlikely, in my opinion. I should mention here that there is an important north-south rock scarp, possibly linked to the position of the east wall of the temple, though one doesn't know whether this is from the Iron Age or from later from the Herodian period, who knows. But it can be seen running within a chamber known as the Masjid al-Nabi, situated to the northwest of the Dome of the Rock. For some reason, this important rock scarp has been neglected in all discussions relating to the possible layout and size of the original temple, even though the documentary evidence on the scarp was already published by Jacobson and myself in 1996. In terms of finds of Iron Age pottery, examples were already noted in the 19th century by Charles Warren along the outer perimeter walls of the Temple Mount. Since then, Iron Age materials in quantity have been found in excavations all around by Benjamin Mazar along the foot of the Temple Mount, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go into those details because they have been discussed earlier. In terms of the finds from the soil sorting to the process inside the Temple Mount, that's another matter. However, individual pottery finds in situ have been very rare. Yes, we have those objects retrieved from the soil washing project conducted by Gabriel Barkai and others. However, these have been extracted and are no longer in situ, which is problematic. However, this all changed in August 2007 when the Waqf dug trenches for placing an electrical cable. And this revealed in one of the trenches, known as segment 7, close to the southeast corner of the inner platform, as reported by Bauch, Rach, and Sandhaus, an accumulation of light brown soil containing Iron Age 2 potsherds of bowls, cooking pots, and jars, etc., all dated to the 8th to 6th centuries BCE. And they were thought to be the first that were in situ within the Temple Mount esplanade. However, this is not the case. Indeed, Iron Age pottery in situ was found in a little known but important salvage operations that were undertaken by Cedric Norman Johns inside the Temple Mount in April-May 1946. And Dr. Saint Laurent just mentioned in regard to those wasters, and she showed a picture very similar to the one that you can see here. On the right, you can see C.N. Johns standing there. He didn't like being photographed, so it was quite a feat to find that photograph. In any case, this work was undertaken on behalf of the British Mandatory Department of Antiquities outside next to the steps and arcade, the Mizan Ashaki, along the eastern perimeter of the inner Dome of the Rock Plaza. But the results were not published. The Palestine Exploration Fund in the early 1990s received from Johns's son, who goes by the name of Adam, who is a medical doctor, a number of boxes containing archival materials, as well as his field notebooks, which I then accessed. In his field notebook for 1943 to 46, Johns wrote about his excavations. It includes sketched elevation drawings and measurements and photographs. Importantly, Johns describes finding within the bedding below the stairs that you see in the central photograph, right at the bottom, a layer of red soil, terra rossa, containing Iron Age 2 ring-burnished potsherds of 8th to 6th centuries BCE appearance. So that is quite important, and it's quite interesting. You can see it here. The star on the right, you can see where it says Johns 1946. That is where it was found. So this appears to have been the first time that Iron Age materials were discovered in scientific excavations within the Temple Mount. And importantly, this material was found just 70 meters or so to the east of the surmised position of the Jewish temple. This layer seen by Johns may be a continuation northwards of the same layer later seen by Bauch and others further south, close to the southeast corner of the inner platform. Let's now turn to a large water reservoir just north of the Aqsa Mosque, which I think on Iron Age, on morphological grounds, can be dated to Iron Age. This is a very large rock-cut water reservoir situated beneath the southern end of the Temple Mount in the court area just in front, that is to the north of the Aqsa Mosque. It is named in Arabic Bir Buhaya, or the Small Sea, and this is Wilson and Warren's cistern number 8. And it may very well be the same as the Great Sea mentioned in the Mishnah, Urubin 10:14. It was first investigated, mapped by Berkeley, and then later examined and studied by a series of scholars, Pierotti, Wilson, Warren, and Schick. And here you can see, this is a representation of the cistern, and you can see a picture on the top right is taken in 1965, not long after they replaced the Dome of the Rock with the golden covering there. You can see the opening there in the foreground. The reservoir is, and these are the details of the dimensions of the cistern, which were published in the book, which has been mentioned a couple of times today. The reservoir is approximately 40 by 30 meters, and it is mostly rock cut, except for a number of stone ceiling slabs. And it has a broad flight of 40 to 50 steps descending into a large chamber divided up into 3 galleries by rock partitions. It has a capacity of about 12,000 square cubic meters of water, though as you can see, it was perhaps never entirely full. This system was memorialized in 2 wonderful watercolors by William Simpson in early 1871. One painting shows the stepped rock cut passage leading down to the floor of the reservoir, and the other is a view of the interior. It greatly resembles Iron Age water systems known from Bet Shemesh, Tzuba, Beersheba, and the Amman citadel, specifically in regard to the appearance of the rock-cut steps, the horizontal galleries, the projections and recesses in the walls, and the roughly cut and heavily plastered walls. It is conceivable that such systems are of a type known as the An-Ashoch, which are referred to in the Misha stele from the 9th century BCE. These are the examples, as you can see here. I'll deal with parallels to this water system in eventual publication, perhaps which will be based on this paper. Meanwhile, however, I'd like to point out that if my proposed date for the first use of this reservoir in the 10th century BCE is correct, then it might help confirm the general situation of Solomon's royal palace, which according to the biblical account, notably the first book of Kings, chapter 7, verse 12, was situated immediately south of the temple itself. This is notwithstanding a different suggestion that has been made, as you know, by Sishkin in 2009, that the palace should be placed on the north side. It is likely that the palace was rectangular, but we really don't know, within its own courtyard, and as suggested by quite a few scholars based on comparisons of the development of late Bronze to early Iron Age date. So this is a kind of reconstruction. As you can see, there's a dotted line representing the area that might have been, topographically speaking, the area in which the temple was located, but see the cistern at the bottom, which might have been the focus for the palace area. Topographically, it seems quite reasonable that the palace would have served as a buffer between the town itself, located above the Gihon Spring, and the temple to its north on the summit, built on land that had been consecrated for purposes of worship, with strict prohibitions and regulations. The temenos itself, the enclosure that is, would probably have been marked by a freestanding wall, or it was surrounded by a retaining wall, as was common at many other contemporary temples in the Near East. But it is unknown whether this enclosure was rectangular in shape or whether it followed the contours of the hill. And that brings me to the final point. How much time do I have? I'm okay? Okay, I'll try and sum up. I wanted to sort of lead into a discussion as to Josephus' account, but I'll probably leave that one out and leave it to the publication. But let me now talk about this segment of ashlar walling seen along the Eastern Temple Mount wall, and whether it might, as some have suggested, conceivably be of Iron Age date. Lepoer has maintained that the central segment of the eastern Haram wall, or at least its lower parts, which are hidden underground, might conceivably date back to Solomonic times, but this view has not received general acceptance among scholars. Indeed, it is a claim difficult to prove or disprove, since Warren's work on the Temple Mount walls in the late 1860s was unsuccessful in documenting the lower parts of the eastern wall of the Temple Mount, except at its northern and southern ends. Indeed, in a letter from 1888 to Thomas Hayter Lewis, who was a well-known professor of architecture at the time, Wilson, that's Charles Wilson, wrote, quote, "I have the greatest admiration for Warren's excavations, but for want of funds, they were far from complete. The east wall of the Temple Mount has not been seen below ground except at the northeast and southeast angles. And a careful study of Warren's drawings and descriptions of the masonry has led me, that is Wilson, to form a different opinion of their age. Today, this area is outside the Eastern Temple Mount wall is currently inaccessible for archaeological excavation in view of the existence of a very large and extensive Muslim cemetery. The earlier masonry that is currently seen extending to the north of the seam should be dated, I would maintain, to the time of Herod the Great and to no earlier. This is a subject for a different lecture. And I mentioned it briefly. You can see the seam there, the very well-known seam. The wall on the right, as I mentioned, has been dated from Solomonic all the way through Yom Safir, the late Professor Safir, dated to the Hasmonean period, and so forth. My opinion is that this is from Herod the Great and is part of this development of the different stages in terms of the esplanade of the temple area. I just wanted to say that Josephus has something to say in his book, Wars, book 5, sections 184 to 187, where he assumes a history for the early development of the outer enclosure walls for the Temple Mount area going back to the time of Solomon. Whether there's any historical basis to his narrative is uncertain, and it may consist of conflated facts, but the sequencing, this is just something I'm just putting out there, the sequencing he suggests for the enclosure walls is quite interesting and perhaps informative. And I will dwell upon that in the final publication because I don't want Katya sort of giving me a tough time. So thank you very much, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So with no further delay,